Close your eyes for just a moment. Picture a Saturday morning in 1980s Britain, the smell of engine oil drifting through a cracked window, Radio 1 playing softly in the background, and parked on the drive, a car that wasn't glamorous, wasn't flashy, but somehow meant everything. These were the machines that took families to seaside holidays, school runs, and Sunday afternoon drives through the countryside. They weren't supercars. They were something far better. They were real life. And somewhere in your memory, one of these cars belongs to your dad. Today, we're counting down 10 British cars that defined a generation. Stay with us, because number 1 might just take your breath away. Number 10, Morris Ital. If there was ever a car that perfectly captured Britain at the turn of the 80s, it was this one, slightly awkward, quietly dependable, and somehow absolutely everywhere. Launched in 1980, the Ital was British Leyland's final attempt to modernize the old Morris Marina platform, and what's surprising is that it actually sold. Thousands of ordinary families drove one without a second thought. Your neighbor had one parked outside. Your uncle collected his kids from school in one. Maybe your dad did the same. It wasn't a head-turner, nobody pretended it was. But it started every single morning, swallowed the weekly shopping without complaint, and never once asked for much in return. The estate version was especially practical, offering proper room for a family, a dog, and everything in between. Do you remember spotting one of these on your street? Back then, you simply couldn't miss them. Number 9, Talbot Horizon. Now here's a car that most people have quietly forgotten about, and that's exactly what makes it so fascinating. Launched in Britain in the late 70s but finding its real audience right through the early and mid-80s, the Horizon was a front-wheel drive family hatchback that offered something genuinely modern for its time. What most people don't realize is that the Horizon actually won the European Car of the Year award when it launched, a fact that surprises almost everyone today. It was comfortable, spacious, and appealed directly to practical-minded dads who needed reliability without fuss. But here's the strange part. The Talbot badge itself was quietly fading through the 80s as Peugeot took control, giving the Horizon a peculiar twilight quality. Present on every high street, yet somehow already disappearing. Was this part of your childhood? If your dad chose sensibly and without drama, the Horizon might well have been his car. Number 8, Triumph Acclaim. And this is where things get genuinely interesting. The Acclaim arrived in 1981 carrying one of Britain's most storied automotive names, Triumph, but underneath the skin, it was something entirely different. Built in collaboration with Honda and based on the Honda Ballade, it was assembled at the Cowley plant in Oxford. Some people called it a betrayal of British engineering. But here's the strange part, it was actually brilliant. Reliable in a way that British Leyland cars hadn't always managed to be. Smooth, refined, and put together with real care. Professionals loved it immediately. The sort of dad who wore a collar to work and liked things done properly often found himself extremely comfortable behind the wheel of a Triumph Acclaim. It had a quiet dignity about it. A sense that someone had finally got things right. And then the Triumph name disappeared forever after this car. It was the last of a legend. Number 7, Austin Maestro. The Austin Maestro, launched with considerable fanfare in 1983, the Maestro was supposed to be the car that finally rescued British Leyland, a roomy, modern hatchback with a digital dashboard and, remarkably, a synthesized voice that actually spoke to you. You heard that correctly. The early versions announced faults and warnings out loud in a calm, robotic tone. It was either brilliantly ahead of its time or utterly unnerving, depending entirely on who you asked. What happened next changed things considerably. The talking dashboard was quietly dropped as buyers found it more alarming than reassuring. But the Maestro soldiered on throughout the decade, finding a genuinely loyal audience among families who needed real practicality without the price of a Cavalier or a Sierra. Your dad might have had one in red, or in that particular shade of beige that only the 80s could have produced. Cheerful, spacious, and thoroughly, unapologetically British. Would you still drive one today? Number 6, Ford Orion. Now, you might be thinking, wasn't the Orion simply an Escort with a boot bolted on? And technically, you wouldn't be entirely wrong. But that completely misses the point of what the Orion meant in 1983 Britain. The saloon body gave it a seriousness, a respectability, that the hatchback Escort never quite carried. And the people who chose it knew exactly what they were doing. Middle managers drove Orions. Sales representatives covered motorway miles in them every Monday morning without a second thought. Dads who wanted something just a touch more grown-up, something that suggested a certain quiet, unhurried ambition, they chose the Orion. It was comfortable on long runs, economical enough to keep the fuel bill sensible, and just smart enough to park outside a decent house without looking out of place. But its real story is the story of aspirational Britain in the 80s. And that story is worth remembering. Number 5. Austin Montego. If the Maestro was the practical family hatchback, the Montego was its more serious, straight-backed sibling, a proper saloon and estate for the driver who genuinely meant business. Launched in 1984, it slotted above the Maestro in the British Leyland lineup and aimed squarely at company car drivers and family men who needed real boot space on long journeys. The estate version in particular was a genuine workhorse. Long drives to Wales, weekend trips to the tip, camping holidays in the Lake District with everything imaginable strapped firmly to the roof rack, the Montego handled all of it without a murmur. What most people don't realize today is that the Montego actually sold in enormous numbers during the mid-80s. Not beloved exactly, but trusted. The sort of car your dad would have described simply as solid. And in 1980s Britain, solid was about the highest praise a family car could ever receive. Number 4. Rover 213. And now we are moving into genuinely interesting territory. The Rover 200 series arrived in 1984, and the 213 was its entry point, compact, carefully refined, and carrying the Rover badge, which still meant something quite special to a certain generation of British drivers. Like the Triumph Acclaim before it, the 213 was built on a Honda platform, and the partnership had matured considerably by this point. The result was a small car that felt genuinely premium, a quality interior that you simply didn't expect at that sort of price. Dads who had always quietly dreamed of owning a Rover but couldn't quite stretch to the larger models found the 213 to be a deeply satisfying answer to that question. It drove with confidence, it looked smart parked outside a suburban house, and it said something subtle but unmistakable about the kind of person behind the wheel. Stay with us, the top 3 is where the real memories begin. Number 3. Vauxhall Astra MK1. The Vauxhall Astra, the very first generation, boxy, honest, and absolutely everywhere throughout the early 1980s. When Vauxhall introduced the Astra in 1980 to replace the aging Chevette, they brought Britain a genuinely modern hatchback capable of taking on the Ford Escort properly. And it did, brilliantly. The Astra came in 3-door and 5-door versions, and later as a practical estate, and each variant found its audience with remarkable speed. Young families, factory workers, teachers, tradespeople, the Astra crossed social lines in a way that very few cars ever managed. Here's what makes it interesting though, the early Astra was German underneath, sharing its foundations with the Opel Kadett. But nobody particularly cared. It felt entirely British by the time it reached your street. Was this part of your childhood? Chances are you remember one, parked outside a terraced house, slightly muddy around the wheel arches, completely and utterly unbothered by everything. Number 2. Vauxhall Cavalier MK2. The Vauxhall Cavalier. Specifically, the second generation, the one that arrived in 1981 and became, for a remarkable stretch in the mid-80s, the best-selling car in Britain. Think about that for a moment. Not a Ford. Not a Rover. The Cavalier. It was handsome without being dramatic, quick enough to feel satisfying on a motorway run, and available in enough variants to suit almost anyone with almost any budget. Company car drivers adored it completely. The 1.6-gallon saloon was practically the unofficial uniform of the British sales force. And if your dad worked in an office, wore a tie on weekdays, and had strong opinions about the M6 at rush hour, there is a very real chance he drove a Cavalier at some point. It carried a quietly assured quality that felt modern and forward-looking in a way many British cars of that era simply didn't. And what came next? We're almost there. Number 1. Rover SD1. Number 1. The Rover SD1. And if this surprises you, stay with us for just one final moment. When the SD1 first appeared in 1976, it won the European Car of the Year award and genuinely stunned the automotive world. By the 1980s, it had settled into becoming a fixture of British roads, a large, commanding fastback that seemed to carry the spirit of something Italian in every one of its lines. Designed by David Bake, the shape was simply breathtaking. Imagine a car that looked as though it had arrived from a Turin design studio, yet was quietly assembled in Solihull. The SD1 attracted doctors, headmasters, senior managers, men who wanted something that announced their arrival without ever raising its voice. The 3500 V8 version was genuinely, thrillingly quick. But even the humbler four-cylinder models had a presence on the road that few modern cars can honestly match. Complicated, occasionally troubled, but absolutely magnificent. The definitive British dad car of the 1980s. And there you have it, 10 cars that carried a generation. Some were flawed. Some were forgotten far too quickly. But every single one of them was woven into the fabric of 1980s Britain, parked in driveways, loaded onto ferries, and driven through Sunday afternoons when time seemed to move at an entirely different pace. These weren't just cars. They were memories on four wheels. So tell us, which one did your dad drive? Drop your answer in the comments below. We genuinely love reading your stories. And if you enjoy this kind of nostalgic journey through Britain's past, please consider subscribing to Britain Rewind. There's much more to come, and we'll see you in the next one.